There was kind of this hot trend of making this list of all of the qualities of your dream person to try to like attract that to yourself or whatever. And I remember going to this talk once where the person was basically making the argument of, yeah, we go about making these lists of what we want our partner to be like, but we don't stop and think, who is the me that I want to be that that person would want to be with? I think that even not thinking about it quite so transactionally, I love the idea of just focusing on like, but who do I want to be? Because if I'm living that more clearly, or at least closer to what I want, then there's kind of less pressure on having those other relationships be a certain way or fill a certain part. And I would argue you would end up attracting more of what you want because you're able to more clearly live your values instead of just reacting to things coming in externally. Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jace.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you and we're here for you.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about making agreements with yourself instead of just making agreements with a partner. You might be feeling trapped or suffocated by agreements that you made with a partner, or you might be feeling frustrated by agreements that aren't working or are constantly being renegotiated, or maybe you're just exhausted from conflict around broken agreements. Lots of non-monogamy advice centers around making agreements with partners, including this show sometimes. But today, we're going to look at how shifting your perspective to focus on self-agreements can transform your relationship dynamics, reduce conflict and blame, and increase your sense of personal agency. Also, if you're interested in learning about our fundamental communication tools that we reference on this show, you can check out our book, Multiamory, Essential Tools for Modern Relationships. It covers our most used communication tools for all types of relationships, and you can find links to buy it at multiamory.com/book. or wherever fine books or audiobooks are sold.
Okay, kids, have the two of you ever actually sat down and written down agreements with a partner before? And bonus points if these were directly related to non-monogamy in some form or fashion.
I don't think specifically written agreements, but verbal agreements, absolutely. And yes, they did specifically relate to non-monogamy. Stuff like, okay, if you're going to sleep with someone, let me know about it. And if you're going to sleep with someone, we should always be wearing condoms. Like everyone should be wearing condoms at all times, kind of thing. Just even when you're not having sex. No, I'm kidding. That's what that sounded like for a second. At all times, as you get up all in the morning, the time. Throw one on.
Strap it on.
Yes.
It's just good for your health, you know.
But besides that, and not really any additional agreements that I can think of, but the transparency one is a big one, I think.
Yeah, I actually don't think I've ever written them down, like had a meeting where we're going to like write down all these agreements. Yeah, so I can't say that I have. Have you?
I don't think I have either. I mean, I've had, with you, Jace, and then with other partners, like I might have a long running radar notes document where sometimes the result of a radar is you come up with an agreement around something, or maybe you decide, oh, we're going to experiment with these things. So it's like I've written, like Jace, you and I will write down things like Dedeker will be nicer to Jace around this particular topic. That's not a very good agreement. It's not a very good example of a good agreement,
sure.
Right? Let me think of one that's actually a better example. Something like Jace is gonna wrap up work by 5:00 every single day, and Dedeker is gonna start her mornings going for a walk or whatever, like stuff that's related to maybe our own personal goals that we might share with each other. So yeah. I don't know if that's maybe the closest that I've gotten. I've never sat down in a formal process, which is something that's, to me, seems to be like at least quite popular in the non-monogamy community.
I think I see a lot of people doing this, yeah. And I think we've even encouraged people to do that sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It just almost makes it, there's like a sense of formality to writing something down that almost makes it feel a little bit more scary if that agreement is breached in some way.
There's a paper trail now.
Sure, yeah, exactly. It's not just like a verbal, like, oh, I trust you, you trust me, but rather like this sense that one needs to write something down and post it somewhere so that you can see it. I don't know. That feels a little bit more intense.
On the other hand, I have definitely found times, even with not specifically relationship agreements, but like the three of us will have a call and we'll agree of how we're going to handle something or something we're going to do. And then when we come back to say, like, did we follow that agreement? We're all like, oh, I thought it was this. And I thought it was that, but like slightly different, that we all
Fair.
don't quite remember it exactly the same. And I think that is something to be said for being able to just remember and check. Sometimes I'm like, I'd like to know what it was, and I just don't quite remember exactly where we landed on this.
I'm sorry, I just had $1 million idea. Do you want to hear it?
I love it.
Please.
Okay, because the solution for us has now been to like have an AI note taker hanging out in our Zoom room when we're having
Right,
meetings,
when the three of
to
us
keep
talk,
track, right, and take notes so that we can reference something when we get into the situation where we don't remember the details of what we actually agreed on.
And your idea is that we should all start dating AIs instead.
Close. That's very close.
We'll do an episode on that someday, but
That's very
not
close.
today.
No, I'm thinking of like, can we launch the AI note taker that hangs out at your radars, either
I
at your
like it.
radars or at every single conversation you ever have with a partner, so that you can turn to them in the heat of conflict and be like, hey, AI note taker, what was it that he said 6 weeks ago when we had a
boy, oh
conversation
boy.
about this? I'm telling you, relationships are going to thrive. Everyone's going to be happy.
This technology already exists, though, by the way. Like on an episode of Hard Fork, there's like a thing that you can wear that will basically remember all of your discussion with a person or with multiple people. And ideally, you're asking, I mean, I think in some states, you have to ask if you
Yeah.
can record a person. But that technology absolutely already exists. But yeah, trust me, I wish that I had that sometimes when my partner's like, you said that thing yesterday. I'm like, I did? Oh, God. Really? Something along those
Yeah,
lines.
I'm pretty sure there's a Black Mirror episode about this, though,
yeah.
about how it was like a contact that could record all of your interactions and you could play them back. And yeah, it caused some horrible problems in those people's relationships. So yeah.
Well, on that note, I wanted to get to the bottom of this whole relationship agreements phenomenon, since it seems so part and parcel of this particular non-monogamy subculture. From what I can tell, it's mostly a non-monogamy subculture thing. I can't really find a lot of instances online of people talking about relationship agreements or sitting down and having this formal process with your partner of sitting down and talking about your agreements. There's not a lot of coverage outside of the non-monogamy community. I did find, like, in 2021, the concept of relationship contracts had this brief moment in the sun in, I would say, maybe more normal monogamous heterosexual land. It had a brief moment in the sun. It doesn't seem like it took off. Out of curiosity, I started Googling, are monogamy agreements a thing? Not really.
Maybe
I
they
found
should
one.
be.
Results.
They should be. I found one
Yeah.
lady's blog post where she talked about it. And to be fair, it was about something that I actually think a lot of monogamous people should discuss, which is like, what are the terms of our monogamy, right? Like,
Right.
what does that actually...
What does monogamy mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean? But I don't think I see a lot of people rushing out to create their monogamy agreements anytime soon here. Now, as Jay said, that, you know, on our show, we've often encouraged people to make agreements with your partner, and I would still stand by that, right? Like, the first thing out the gate that I want to say is that sitting down and making agreements with your partner, whether that's highly formalized and written down or whether it's very informal and verbal and organic, partner agreements are not a problem in and of themselves. I do think there can be problems with them, and they can
Yeah,
be created
definitely.
and utilized in ways that can sometimes ultimately create more problems than they actually solve. So, of course, ultimately, please communicate with your partners, collaborate with them, compromise, negotiate, and through all that communicating, compromising, and negotiating, that may involve making agreements with your partners. However, I wanted us to dive into some of the common problems that can arise from maybe an overemphasis on creating agreements with your partners. And I feel like we touched on some of these before, right? And I think, like Jace, that's a huge one. The one that happens between the three of us all the time is that sometimes people can agree on something and then walk away having a completely different understanding of what that agreement actually was.
Yeah. Yeah, and like which parts in the discussion were more hypothetical, maybe it could be this, and then didn't end up in the final agreement, versus what things that were briefly touched on are like, yes, that's part of it. So yeah, it definitely, we've seen that challenge come up a lot with people in agreements in general. And I think this one does show up in monogamy, kind of like we were talking about, where someone does something that to them is okay under the terms of being monogamous, and to the other person it's not. And that one, maybe they didn't even really discuss it, but then they end up having these different impressions of it, that same sort of thing can happen when you have talked about something. And one person gets upset saying, oh, you would told me if you did this. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, that we would talk about it later at some point. Like, but not that I would have to check in with you beforehand. Like, it's those little pieces of the detail that might have gotten misunderstood by the two different people.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that, like, let's take an example of an agreement that I've seen people make before, which is, well, let's agree that if either of us starts dating somebody new, we'll take it slow. We're both going to agree to take it slow with people that we're dating.
Yeah.
That's
right?
very vague.
Yeah. So like, but both people could be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We should totally take it slow. That's just like responsible. And they could be 100% on the same page. And then in reality, it can all fall apart. And, you know, one of the reasons could be like language, right? The unclarity, the lacking of clarity in language, that sometimes what one person considers to be taking it slow isn't the same as what the other person considers to be taking it slow. Sometimes I think that we can be prone to what I would call wishful agreeing, like maybe overextending our capacity or not having an accurate sense of what we're actually capable of, right? That like where I am right now, where like I'm not dating anybody, it feels very easy. Be like, yeah, totally, I'll totally take it slow. Like that just makes sense. And then like once I date someone I'm really excited, then suddenly it's really, really hard, right?
Yeah,
Of course.
It's very different to take it slow in that case.
Yeah.
Where you're
And
excited
also as human
yeah.
beings, we each have our own biases in the sense that maybe if I start dating someone, in my brain, I'm like, this feels like it's going slow to me. But to my partner, it doesn't feel that way at all, right? Even though maybe we might like, this is weird to set up two people dating somebody else in parallel, whatever. But like, if we try to keep everything the same, still my own human biases are going to maybe make me trend towards thinking that my partner's moving fast and maybe I'm moving slow, even if we're moving at quote unquote a similar rate with a relationship. And like all that to say is just there's a lot that can get in the mix that can make an agreement like that not really function very well at the end of the day.
Throughout the course of dating someone, people change, and it's really difficult to sort of know that what you meant at the beginning of a relationship or what you meant at the beginning of creating an agreement is going to be what it means 3 years down the line or even 6 months down the line. And it's difficult sometimes for people to set up like a regular ritual for revisiting and renegotiating an agreement that they had made at an earlier time in their relationship. So that means that like maybe last minute, like ad hoc renegotiation might happen in a situation where perhaps, like you said, well, I know that initially we talked about taking it slow, but I kind of feel right now like I want to just let things sort of happen as they do. And that means that perhaps if I get in a situation with someone where I really feel strongly for them, then I just want to see where that goes. And so that kind of like quick renegotiation on the part of one person or both people might happen just kind of out of the blue, for example.
Well, I feel like the classic one that happens all the time is like getting a text 5 minutes before your partner's about to penetrate somebody else, of them asking if we can renegotiate the condom thing. I think that's happened 6 billion times to so many people.
Yeah, I was thinking that more the example is like, oh, we agreed no sleepovers, but like I'm out with this person. It would feel weird for me to leave. Like it feels more appropriate that I would spend the night here. Like that one comes up a lot too.
One that I've personally done actually, and it wasn't really like a renegotiation per se. Again, it was kind of wishy-washy from the beginning, but where I had said to a partner, you know, I think of you more as like my primary person. And then this other person that I'm dating, I'm thinking more in like a secondary way. And then I got to a point where I was like, actually, I really, really like this other person a lot. And so I kind of renegotiated. It was like, well, actually, I think I just want to be a little bit more egalitarian in the way that I see both of your relationships with me. Which I think in reality meant that I was losing interest a little bit in the first person and realizing that the second person was more who I wanted to be with ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, there's like several layers to that one there. But I
Sure.
think what all of this is making me think of is something that I see quite frequently with agreements is people trying to make too many agreements too early in a relationship. And that's where you get that sort of situation, right? Of like, oh yeah, at this point, early in this relationship, when I'm full of NRE and I don't actually know this person very well, and I think these are the things I want, we're going to come up with all these agreements. Or you've been in this relationship a long time and you're just opening it up. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're going to make all these agreements. And then if you're not revisiting those regularly with this understanding that these are going to evolve and change, you can end up in those situations where, yeah, we agreed to this thing at this one time, but I feel differently now, or our situation is different, or well, we made those agreements before we realized we would have significant emotional relationships with other people, right? Any number of things can happen, I think, because we think, oh yeah, relationship agreements are good. Let's do them as soon as possible, but they also need to be able to change.
Yeah, and I do think that for some people, making an agreement, whether it's, we sit down and we write them down together or we just verbally agree, for some relationships that can feel more stabilizing. I think especially if you're a previously monogamous relationship that is now opening up and you're headed into what feels like maybe scary, overwhelming territory, it can feel, this is a rock, this is an anchor for us to come back to. We have these set of agreements. That can be good. Or in other relationships, this is a rock that I can now use to sledgehammer you with, right? When we stumble out the gate or when we get into arenas that we didn't expect that we were going to be getting into, which leads me into how for some people, they find that they end up in this trial and error process with agreements and with renegotiating them. And again, some relationships can handle a trial and error process like this. Like actually a lot of the people that I know who have been functionally, healthily, happily non-monogamous for a long time, including myself, can refer to the early days of like, oh man, I made this agreement and I wanted my partner to do this and I tried to control my partner in this way. And wow, I was like, what a piece of work, right? And we had to work through that and move through that. So like, yes, that some relationships can handle essentially a functional rupture and repair cycle, right? Of like, oh, we made this agreement. Uh-oh, turns out that doesn't work for both of us or it doesn't work for one of us. Like we got to renegotiate this or find a different way of going about this. But a lot of classic poly hell can come from a relationship where the rupture and repair cycle isn't functioning, which means that then the trial and error method of finding out what agreements actually work for you can create a lot more stress than it eases stress. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think it's such a tricky thing, right? Because I do think having a sense of what you both are doing, especially as you're opening up a relationship or just maybe starting a new relationship where one person is new to non-monogamy, that it can help to kind of have some guideposts of, yeah, this is roughly what to expect. This is certain things that are really important that we're going to stick to. But it does also set you up to fail, where it's like now you have things that you can fail to live up to. And so it is this tricky thing during that period when you're still trying to figure out what that is. And I guess I would say to a certain extent, that period of trying to figure out what you want lasts your whole life because it's constantly changing. But I think especially during those times where a lot of things are changing about your worldview or how you see relationships or what your life situation is like, it's like, yeah, finding that way to allow you to explore without too strict of agreements blocking that process of figuring out what you want, figuring out what you're comfortable with, right? Maybe I learned that I actually would be comfortable with my partner spending the night with someone else. But because we set up that agreement, now if they want to do it, I feel like, oh, I'm conceding so much by letting them do this thing that we'd originally said we wouldn't do, when maybe I actually would have been fine with that. But we hadn't gotten there yet. We hadn't reevaluated that yet. So just some things to watch out for in that trial and error process.
I'm hearing here is that we just need to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to these types of agreements, that if you are going to be making agreements with your partner, there probably should be a sense of flexibility or just an understanding that things probably are going to change over the course of your relationship together. But I'm interested to talk about the self-agreement side of things and see if perhaps those are not necessarily as movable, or what we think about that. Because I don't know. I think that there are like fundamental core values that maybe you don't want to compromise on. And then there are certain things within a relationship standpoint that you're like, yeah, I could see myself compromising on that over time.
Yeah, so the reason why this episode was born was actually several months ago. I had a conversation with a friend of the pod, Marie Tuin, the compersion researcher. She texted me because she was working with a couple of clients of hers where, if I recall correctly, this couple had kind of been through the ringer of what we're referring to of like trying to create agreements together, and it's acting more like a sledgehammer, like it's creating more stress than it's creating ease. And she was in the process of actually trying to coach them more towards making agreements with themselves individually, as opposed to making this a process that they worked on with the two of each other. And we're going to get more into that after our break.
So we're going to take a quick break to talk about our sponsors for this show. Please do give them a listen. Use our promo codes. Check out our show description for links to use those promo codes. And then, of course, if you would like to get ad-free episodes and be a part of our amazing community and get bonus offers on episodes, you can go to multiamory.com/join and sign up on our sliding scale on Supercast.
So the concept of self-agreements fundamentally comes back to focusing on the commitments that you know that you can make with yourself. Now, I talked about texting with Marie before the break, and the way that conversation started actually was that Marie reached out to me wanting to know if I would share my constitution with her. Now, my constitution, which if you've been listening to the show for a very long time, you'll probably know.
Since like the very beginning.
Yes,
Yeah.
the very, very beginning. You probably know what I'm talking about. I haven't talked about it in a while, so I figured that if it's okay with the two of you, I'd do a little bit of story time. Yeah, so this is going back in the time machine all the way back to, 2015? Gosh, over 10 years ago at this point. Yeah, where I know myself, and by extension, the two of you, and I feel like everyone we knew and loved was embroiled in like our own very unique like poly hell, of our quad.
It was drama time.
Yeah, our quad imploding, so much drama time, like so high stakes. It was a very formative time for me, for sure, in not only figuring out like what kind of a relationships do I want, but like what kind of non-monogamy do I want? Like it was the first time in my life I actually had to grapple with the whole hierarchy thing, right? And grappling with like metamors who really did not get along with each other. And it was like a really, really stressful time. And like a lot of hinge partners, I was running around feeling like my hair is on fire. I'm just trying to keep everybody happy and nobody's happy. And it doesn't really matter what I want. I'm really just trying to keep everybody else happy, right? And so I pulled probably a pretty classic Dedeker Winston move, which is like, fine, I'm going to take my toys
Got out of there.
and I'm going to leave. At that time, it was, I'm going to leave for the weekend by myself and I'm not going to talk to anybody. I really just need some time to think and to clear my head and to just like really just like sit with myself and actually figure out what is it that I want, because I'm getting kind of lost in the weeds of getting distracted by like what this partner wants, what that partner wants, what my friend's opinion is about what this person should want or what I should want or whatever, right? So I just like booked a couch surfing stay in a city that was like not too far away and spent a lot of time with myself. And the results of that was I went through this like brief mania where I just started writing like a mad woman this document that eventually I came to title as like my personal constitution, as the Constitution of Dedeker Winston. Yes, I did model it after the US Constitution. Yes, I've included a link to this Google Doc in the show notes, but by clicking on that link, you consent to not make fun of me. You are free to dislike my writing. You're free to hate the format. You can choose a totally different approach for yourself. That's totally fine. Just don't tease me for being a nerd. Okay? Okay, got it? Got it. Great. Okay. So, okay, welcome back. Now that you've gone and like seen how nerdy I was, you've looked through my Constitution document. Great. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yeah. So for myself, the important parts of this exercise, and I just did it on my own. Like I didn't consult any other kind of like guide or list of questions or whatever. I just kind of like started like dumping onto the page essentially. The important parts for me was that I started with what I expected of myself and how I wanted to show up in partnership and what I think is reasonable for other people to expect from me. So as in, I really explicitly laid out, this is how I expect myself to communicate. This is what I expect of myself in regards to disclosure of information and to whom. This is what I expect of myself as far as respecting other people's boundaries and respecting other people's privacy. This is what I expect of myself as far as like how I want to treat my partners during conflict. This is what I expect as far as the effort that I want to put in towards creating one-on-one time with each of my partners, right? So like I started with, this is what I want to put on the table. And then I wrote about then what I expect from my partners, right? And what I expect in relationships. So things like, the freedom to communicate with multiple partners, the freedom to show affection, both people in a relationship having the autonomy to influence the course of the relationship that they're in, having my own boundaries honored, things like that. And it was really important for me at the time to write it down. And even with writing it down, I don't think in the last 10 years I've ever had an instance where like I've felt compelled to use it as a sledgehammer on anybody except for myself. Like, like I don't think I've ever had an instance of like, I've ever been able to like shove it in somebody's face to be like, hey, look, this is my constitution, right? Because really it's just about myself for the most part.
Yeah.
And as a reminder to myself of like, this is how I want to show up and this is how I want somebody else to show up, right?
And I know this was a long time ago, but I feel like I remember at that time feeling like, after you wrote that and you told us all about it, that you kind of had more of a sense of confidence in your own decisions and kind of how you wanted to conduct things. And what was interesting about it is that the sense that I got, and I'm curious if this was your impression too, but that because I know a lot of it was focused on what you expected from yourself, and that part of that was that it made you kind of have more clear boundaries with some of your other partners when they were doing something or wanted something from you that got in the way of you being able to do your part of your constitution. So I don't ever remember you saying like, oh, well, I said people would let me do this and that's the issue, but more like communicating clearly and honestly and prioritizing one-on-one time with all of my partners is an important value for me. And so if someone wants something that gets in the way of that, it's a problem because it's in the way of the thing that I've said I should do and how I want to behave in my relationships, which I think is a really different flip on how people sometimes think about boundaries and agreements, where it is coming from this like, no, I can't have that restriction on me because it won't let me do the thing that I value, rather than just what I want to do in other cases, or I have this other competing agreement or something like that.
Yeah, it just feels like a really natural extension of the yourself exercise and discussing how boundaries are all about you. And just also...
That's in our book, by the way, if you are curious what Emily's talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just feeling as though, okay, I am the only person who needs to uphold this. It's not up to my partners to do that, but again, that these are values that are so intrinsic to who I am as a person that the type of non-monogamy or the type of relationship that I want to be in, ideally, it needs to align with the other person's version of non-monogamy so that the two of us can, be in a harmonious relationship together. And I think that is, at its core, probably the most challenging part of this whole thing is finding people who really do align with us in the way that we want to be in relationship with one another.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. It's funny because like when Marie reached out and asked for it, because I've had people over the years, right, like ask me to send it to them or whatever, and I always like reluctantly agree, mostly because like if anything that I've written is more than 30 seconds old, I automatically hate it and don't want anyone to see it. But what's interesting is as I've gone back and looked at it multiple times over the years, so I did not set in any kind of like formal process for myself to go back and revisit it. Of course, I wrote it into the document that it's, changeable and can be ratified by me. Any changes can be ratified.
Amended,
yes. That's a living document, right?
Yes.
But what's interesting is I have gone back to it over the years, either, when people are interested and they want to see it, or sometimes in times when I have been really confused in relationships or really in a quandary, and I will go back to it. And I've actually been amazed that I haven't had to majorly change it or update it or amend it too much in the last 10 years. right? That like whenever I revisit it, I'm kind of like, yeah, this is all pretty accurate to how I want to show up in relationship and how I want people to treat me as well, which is pretty cool. Now, I share this not to say I'm a genius, I figured it out, everybody, you need to follow my template for doing this, right? Like, I think really this connects more to the importance of being able to figure out your values that are yours, not what your partner says that they should be, not what your parents say that they should be, not even necessarily what like the non-monogamy subculture says that they should be. Like, this is very intrinsic and personal to you. So I wanted to give a callback to our episode 319 titled What Are My Values? And I actually pulled a study that we covered in that episode. But basically there was this Stanford University study where students were sent home for winter break and they were told to keep a journal over their break. And the control group was asked to describe positive events that happened during their day. But another group of students were asked to write about their most important personal values and then describe the events of their day and then describe how the events of their day connected with their personal values. And I dropped in this quote from Stanford professor Kelly McGonigal. Quote, "It turns out that writing about your values is one of the most effective psychological interventions ever studied. In the short term, writing about personal values makes people feel more powerful, in control, proud, and strong. It also makes them feel more loving, connected, and empathetic toward others. It increases pain tolerance, enhances self-control, and reduces unhelpful rumination after a stressful experience. It helps people persevere in the face of discrimination. In many cases, these benefits are a result of a one-time mindset intervention. People who write about their values once for 10 minutes show benefits months or even years later." End quote. So that's huge, right?
Yeah, that's quite a statement.
Wow.
These are
Yeah,
findings that
indeed.
have been replicated in several other studies as well. And researchers theorize that the reason for these benefits is that connecting your life events, both positive life events and negative life events, to your personal values helps you to add meaning behind stressful situations. So if you're undergoing something stressful, maybe you're caring for somebody who's ill, or you're going through the stress of having to be honest and vulnerable with a partner, even if it's hard, you can make a connection regarding why these actions are truly important to you, and you're much better able to handle the stress. And I think that's what you're talking about, Jace, when you shared about how I wrote this and then I seemed much more confident afterwards. I can't remember if I actually felt like confident or not, but I do recall like just having more clarity. Right? Maybe that resulted in more confidence to be able to have more confrontations or to be more vulnerable or to be more honest. I don't know. But yeah, I do think it really, really helped a lot.
Yeah, I think that tying it to values makes a lot of sense for how those things would impact you. And it's interesting because I just did an exercise recently in a completely different context than setting up agreements for yourself, but more understanding how you spend your time day to day, that started with this sense of writing down what you value, right? Like what are the things that actually matter to you versus what are the things that you just do because you just do those or you think you should do those. And it is really interesting that it had that through line of tying it to your values to then help make those decisions more meaningful or kind of feel more personal, or that you could have more motivation to make what you do line up better with your values.
So all of this talk does kind of seem like it is similar to boundaries, like I said before. So can you talk about some of the ways in which maybe it's different?
I think there's a lot of overlap, and I don't think it's an accident that our non-monogamy subculture has also really glommed on to the idea of boundaries, right? Everyone being really clear on what their boundaries are. And similarly, this idea of self-agreements or self-commitments and boundaries, they're both about your own behavior and actions rather than starting from a place of putting the emphasis on somebody else's behavior and actions. But like the way that I think about the distinction is I really like to think about creating a garden. I like to think about creating a garden a lot, you know? I don't have any garden space. I only got a balcony, so I have just to fantasize about gardens.
You have plants.
and
We've got
plants.
lots of plants here in the
Yes,
house. Yeah.
It's different. It's different. But imagine like you're creating a little plot of a garden, right? And your boundaries, they're like the fences that keep that garden safe and protected. While something like your self-agreements, it might be more like choosing which flowers you're going to plant or how often you're going to show up to weed the garden or how often you're going to commit to watering the garden or what your fertilization schedule is going to be, right? So like when I think about boundaries, I'm thinking about like safety, self-preservation, or maybe it's a response to how I've been hurt in the past. And when I think about self-agreements, I'm thinking about my values, what it means to have a fulfilling life, what it means to have a joyful life, and what it means to be a good person in relationship, what it means to have a good relationship, I suppose, is maybe the start of that, right?
Yeah, I like the idea that the agreements are the thing that you'd focus on most of the time, meaning your self-agreements or your values, I guess we could say. And I think we talk about this a fair amount in our chapter on boundaries in our book, but kind of this idea that your values are about what's important to you and how you want to live your life, and that ideally in good partnerships and good friendships and family relationships, that's where the focus stays most of the time, is on this is how I want to live my values and how I want to conduct my life and how we want to share certain values together. And that hitting a boundary would be very rare. It's like those are that last line of defense rather than kind of the bumper car method of driving where you're just kind of banging into everything on the road to figure out where to go, instead of kind of having a path where you're going and the bumpers are just there for those emergencies to help protect you.
And it feels like maybe boundaries are a little bit more about what you're protecting yourself against, as opposed to moving from a place of like abundance and these are the things that I'm hoping to get out of my life and these are the ways in which I'm hoping to show up for the people in my life. And yeah, that does tend to come from a little bit more of a value standpoint, as opposed to I've been burned this way in the past and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. I think both are really important because we are human and we go through traumas and we go through challenging times. But I like really that when you did this the first time, Dedeker, even though it did come out of a really difficult time in all of our lives, but especially yours, that you were still able to look inward and decide, I'm going to talk about all of the ways in which I can make my life better and my relationships better, and come at it from that place, as opposed to, I want to make sure nobody does X, Y, and Z to me again.
Totally. Yeah. Because, there's definitely a version of that story because it was like so painful. There's for sure a version where I think I could have just written like a shit list, basically. Of,
Sure, exactly.
Right. Of like, you're
no
not going to say
one's
this
allowed
to
to
me
do any of
again.
these
You're not allowed to do
things.
this.
Yeah.
And no.
Yeah.
Like that probably would have been easy. Maybe still could have been helpful. Not like that would have been a totally useless exercise. but I think this one has had more staying power as far as benefit to my life. So I want to share an example of like a little plant that I'm like trying to plant in my garden right now. My
Great.
garden of good relationships and a good life. Okay, so this is a challenging plant for me. But in my intimate and close relationships, I want to try to be someone who reveals more of myself than I conceal. And that's really difficult. I'm a chewer. I'm a private person. But like to tie it to a value, like I really do think that our intimate relationships are like some of the best parts of life, and to like be more seen and more fully known by people is part of a really good life. And so for me, like my self-agreement is that if I have a choice between the two, I'm going to try to reveal myself to someone rather than conceal myself. Now, where boundaries come in to protect that is like, it doesn't mean I'm just like spilling my guts every which way to whoever, right? Like I think if somebody's asked what I think is an inappropriate question or too personal of a question, or if I'm not ready to talk about something yet, I'll be honest about, hey, I'm not ready to talk about that now or ever or whatever, right? But even within that boundary I've put up to try to keep this little plant safe from being trampled, like I still want to cultivate, I guess, this sense of like emotional availability and vulnerability. And it's hard. The plant is not thriving yet, in case anyone is wondering. I'm working on it.
But you're working on it.
Working on it.
Yeah. But that is a nice idea, though, to think that it's not about like I'm throwing out my boundaries or I'm going to be totally unsafe, but that in those in-between situations, in those tiebreakers, I'm going to try to have this agreement kind of tip the scale the other way than it has in the past, but still within the confines of safety, hopefully.
Do the two of you
Yeah.
have anything like that you think falls into this purview of like self-agreements or self-commitment? Any secret living documents that you haven't shared yet?
Well, when I did my episode on control, I did sort of write down a big, I don't know if I would call it a manifesto necessarily, but things that are really important to me that I want to make sure I have like systems in place to not be in a situation like I was ever again. And yeah, I guess that did come from a place initially of like, I don't want this thing to happen to me again. I want to make sure I'm never taken advantage of in that way again. But they were things like, I don't want anyone to come in between my relationship with Jason Dedeker, for instance, and that people have to be okay with my relationship with the two of you because it's going to be there and it's going to be intimate and it's going to be intense and it's also going to be very meaningful to me. So anyone who doesn't get that, like they don't get to be a part of my life. And, you know, me being able to do things like go to Hong Kong or whatever it may be, things that enable me to practice my own autonomy as a human being. And then also just being able to continue to work on my own healing and on my own, I guess, progress as a human being. Like all of those things, I do feel like I did, and that came out of that episode.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's like chipping away at not just a reaction to like not repeating pain from the past, but chipping away at what are the things that bring you joy and make you happy
Totally.
and are part of a fulfilling life for you, right? And so like making sure that you
it's
prioritize
similar.
that. Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's similar to what this is. And I'd be interested to go back now after the next part of this episode where we talk about how do we actually do this and maybe revise it a little bit so that it is even coming more from that place of let's talk about like what really is at the core here and what are my values.
The example that comes up for me is not something that I've written down or was part of any particular exercise that I can remember, but this honestly probably came about through one of the many, self-journaling exercises or things that I've tried over the years about kind of identifying my values. But one of them is about the close friendships that I have, those kind of like best friend type friendships, which I have several of, as well as some, family relationships, like my relationships with my siblings, of having this sense that these are important to me. And I found that like having that value there helps because I'm someone who by nature falls prey to inertia. Like if I'm at home, I have got a lot of inertia just keeping me at home and I don't really want to go out and do something, or I don't really want to break up what I'm doing to like get on a phone call or something like that. And for me, having that value of, but I do value these things helps in that tiebreaker instance of like, okay, I'm going to go, get myself ready and drag myself out of the house to go spend time with these friends when they're available. Or if it's like, oh, I'm going to go out of my way during this trip to spend another couple days with my brother or something like that, I'll go do that. It helps me to do those things that I could just let my nature of just wanting to like stick to what I'm doing and stay in my room by myself take over and, let those relationships die. And that's not something that I want. And as I'm thinking about this recent exercise I did about how I spend my time and then thinking about these values, I do think it'd be interesting to revisit this in a little bit more of a thorough, complete way and do that, which is exactly what we're going to get into in the final part of this episode. So we're going to take another break to talk about some sponsors. Do check those out. Like I said, use the links in our show description. That does really directly help support our show. And then, of course, if you want to support us in the most direct way, you can become one of our subscribers by going to multiamory.com/join. And for that, you get access to early releases of ad-free episodes, our amazing community, our monthly video processing groups, as well as special things such as a PDF that you can follow along for this exercise right here.
All right, folks. So we've pulled together some prompts to help you come up with your own self-agreements. This is not an exclusive list of prompts. This isn't our patented 10-step exercise to get your very own constitution, although maybe someday, along with launching that horrible AI assistant that's going to ruin your relationship, we'll do that. But
if the kit included like a scroll and a quill pen, that would be pretty
cool.
sweet.
Okay, that's a good upsell. That's a good upsell. Okay, I will consider that. I will consider that. But before diving into these prompts, if you're interested in getting a PDF version of this to make it a little bit easier to follow along or to print out and then write on, that's going to be available to our Supercast subscribers. So if you go to multiamory.com/ join, you can get access to that, or there's a direct link to this PDF in the episode description as well, where if you're already a Supercast subscriber, it'll send you right there. So I want to give a shout out to Martha Kauppi, who also a friend of the show. Martha Kauppi's book, Polyamory, a clinical toolkit for therapists and their clients, has this wonderful exercise in it called How I Plan to Handle NRE, which I recommend this exercise to, frankly, everybody. And so Kauppi's list of prompts, again, is about NRE specifically. I've taken a couple of the prompts from that list because I feel like that they do still work more generally, and then I've also added some prompts of my own. So without further ado, here are some prompts that might help you with creating your own self-agreements. Prompt number 1, the kind of person I aspire to be is blank. So I recommend listing at least 3 qualities that you display when you're at your best. If you're having a hard time thinking about this, you might ask yourself, how would I want the people I love to describe me at my funeral?
Oh,
Oof.
Yes.
Yeah, heavy.
Number 2, in my most important relationships, I show those qualities by blank. So it can help to imagine that you're watching your life like it's a movie. And so how would the movie show through your character's actions that you have the qualities that you listed? If it's a well-written movie, they will show instead of tell. I also like to imagine, like, maybe people are leaving 5-star reviews on your Google Maps listings. What are they going to say about you, about your behaviors specifically, about how, you show your most important or your best qualities? Prompt number 3, describe how you want your partners, both current and future, to feel about you. And related, prompt number 4, if you're non-monogamous, how do you want your partners, current and future, to feel about your shared non-monogamous relationship? Prompt number 5, when you have been the most proud of how you showed up during conflict, what specifically did you do? Pop quiz, Emily and Jason, I want to hear your answer to this question.
Oh, gosh.
yeah, that's tough. I was thinking about that immediately. I think hearing the person trying to reflect back to them what it is that you heard and offering some validation, some understanding, and then if it was something that perhaps you did that you could have done better, just saying, how can we work together to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or that there's a behavior adjustment or something, or stuff along those lines. Like basically just coming at something really rationally without a huge amount of defensiveness, but simply just being able to take it at face value and reflect back and try to be kind and understanding.
I think the times that I can think of being most proud of how I showed up during conflict would be times when I've been able to, even if I'm feeling upset too, or, we're having this conflict, to move past the just immediate what's going on right now, trying to argue, to more of the what's really going on here. What is it that you're wanting? And like being able to come to the other person and, ask that, like, what is it that you really want? Because I want to give it to you, to like clarify, like, it's not because I want to argue against it, but like, I feel like there's something underneath this. And when that's worked successfully, I feel like those have been like some of the most productive disagreements.
I think the times when I've been the most proud of how I showed up during conflict have been the times when I have held my tongue. Step number 1. And then step number 2, recognized and accepted anytime the other person has been making an attempt at repairing.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes. All right. Prompt number 6. What parts of your life do you want to maintain as solely yours, even while you're in close relationships? And finally, prompt number 7. What cues or signs will tell you it's time to update or shift your agreements with yourself? So that's the collection of prompts that we have for creating your own self-agreements. Again, if you want a PDF version of this, you can go to multiamory.com/join to join our Supercast, or if you're already a Supercast subscriber, you can click the link that's in the episode description.
Dedeker, I'm curious, have you ever updated your self-agreement or your constitution with these prompts, or were these kind of the prompts that guided you in the direction of creating that constitution in the first place?
No, these prompts came later for sure, but
Okay.
I haven't done that. Actually, I should sit down and kind of cross-reference answers to these prompts with my existing document, and then I'll go through a process of voting on the ratification of the amendment, and I'll let you know if it passes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Some of these are a little challenging. They really require you to dig deep. And then I think also kind of look at the person that you really want to be. And sometimes maybe even evaluate, like, am I acting in that way? Am I acting in the way that I aspire to act and to be at all times? And then perhaps figure out a way in which to do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of, there was this thing, when would this have been? I guess like in the earlier 2000s, probably, there was kind of this hot trend of making this list of all of the qualities of your dream person to try to like attract that to yourself or whatever. And I remember going to this talk once where the person was basically making the argument of, yeah, we go about making these lists of what we want our partner to be like, but we don't stop and think, who is the me that I want to be that that person would want to be with? And so I think that even not thinking about it quite so transactionally, I love the idea of just focusing on like, but who do I want to be? Because if I'm living that more clearly, or at least closer to what I want, then there's kind of less pressure on having those other relationships be a certain way or fill a certain part. And I would argue you would end up attracting more of what you want because you're able to more clearly live your values instead of just reacting to things coming in externally.
Well, on that note, it is time to wrap it up for this week. On our Instagram stories this week, we are asking this question. If somebody left a 5-star review on a Google Maps listing of you, what would they say? I'm hoping for some creative answers here. The best place to share your thoughts on this episode with other listeners is in the episode discussion channel in our Discord server, or you can also post about it in our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. Multiamory is created and produced by Jace Lindgren, Emily Matlack, and me, Dedeker Winston. Our production assistants are Rachel Shennework and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.